Hello and welcome. I am Alex and this is the second part of the inventory tutorial. So far we have covered all the data classes, our inventory and our item with the data stats and so on and so forth. Well, point is that now it's time to take a look at the controllers, but first I need to make a little stop and show you the items itself. If you remember, the item class, it's an abstract class, which means that we need to inherit from this class to create the actual items. So the actual items, let's say for example I created coins, which inherit from the item of course, and what I did was to use interfaces in order to be able to filter the items later on. So I created a category armor, which is an interface. As you can see, it's empty because I'm only going to use the name itself in order to filter my items later on in the view. So I have the category armor, category coins, category item. As you can see, they are all just empty interfaces, nothing else. And the item itself, like I said, let's focus coins for example, they are all exactly the same. As you see, it's just an empty item belonging to a category in particular. In this case, category coins. The shield is just category armor, and so on, etc, etc, etc. As you can see, the items itself are just empty. And why they are empty? Because the item itself doesn't handle any kind of logic. I mean, the shield is a shield and we don't care about what the shield is all about. I mean, this shield will contain item data and item stats, which are the things that will define this kind of shield, if this shield has +2 defense or whatever thing it has. But the item itself will not handle any kind of logic. You will not add things to the player here. You will not say, well, this item is shield +2, so I'm gonna get the player reference and I'm gonna add a +2 in the armor. No, that's not the purpose of the item itself. In this case, the shield, it doesn't matter if it's a potion, for example, it's just the same. You don't know if this is a healing potion or I don't know, a poison potion, because that will be defined in the data. So if the data has a +2 health, it will heal you, and if it has a negative value like -2 health, it will remove health from you. Let's say poison or whatever other thing that we want to define in the stats itself. But like I said, the potion itself is empty. There's no logic here. The logic will be handled elsewhere. I mean, in the view controller or in the player controller and any other place where we want to interact with that kind of item. Probably in the view where we open the inventory, we drink a potion, so that's the moment when we check what item belongs to the category item, is a potion. We will add whatever amount of points we have within the stats. But that's, like I said, not part of the item itself. So all the items, like I said, are exactly empty. It doesn't matter if it's the arrow, if it's a sword, whatever item, they are just the same, just an empty template to have the category in order to be able later on to filter the view. Because I like those kind of inventories where you have the view filter, kind of like Dark Souls. We have swords in one place, armor in another place, potions or things like that in other place. So that way, this is a good way to filter our inventory by categories. So having talked about the items itself, now you know how to subclass the items. Let's now take a look at our inventory controller itself. This is finally the one that will handle part of the view, because this is the one that will be mixed up with the item UI, which is the item itself. You remember the item UI was the item that has in the view, so we click play, we come to the test and we execute the test. That's the item UI. Each of one of those items on the screen is the item UI exactly. So let's move on. The inventory view controller, as you might think, is really simplistic. We have the prefab to instantiate, which will be as usual kind of the empty item that we will fill in with the proper image, the proper name for the item, the amount, the price, whatever things that you want to add. And in my case, I have the grid, and we has a grid system in order to lay out all the items as a grid. If you are using GUI, I think that there's layout, content layout or something like that. Well, whatever. That's not the point of the tutorial. How do you want to lay out your inventory? It's completely up to you. In my case, as I'm using GUI, I'm just getting the grid here in order to call the grid and lay out all the items, let's say, perfectly. Then I have a serialized field to create how many items I want to have pulled in the view, because obviously when I start playing, I will generate the view. We click play, and there we go. As I have my inventory controller with 20 items within my grid, I have 20 items turned off. The items, of course, are part of the pool, but you cannot see the items yet until you kind of open the view. So this is the amount of items we want to have in our kind of, well, pool, the name suggested. Then we have the list of the items UI, which are the items that we're about to instantiate, which basically is our pool of items, and also a callback to know when an item has been equipped or it wasn't equipped. Later, I have created also this item creator class, which is the class, like I mentioned in the first tutorial. I like to usually fill my inventory with a lot of garbage. So this class will create a lot of garbage items, and only the special items, you know, that the ones that you want to give at after completing a quest or beating a level or a boss or whatever thing, those will be created in a JSON file, because that will have kind of special stats or something that you want to control. But the rest of garbage items, I'll just have this kind of items creator, and I will fill my inventory with a lot of crap that no one cares about. Then in our start function, that will be an awake start, you know, whatever. I will just do a for with the amount of items in my pool, and I will create all those items and get the reference to the item UI and store it in my items UI pool. The destroy, obviously, we will destroy the view, we'll destroy all the objects if they exist, blah blah blah. So I mean, nothing special in this part of the view itself. We have this function to set the callback, because whatever the item was equipped or not, it's not part of our view itself. There will be some sort of other class on top of that handling this kind of things. So that kind of class will be subscribed to this callback. So we will set a callback for the item equipped. So whenever we equip an item in this class, will be notified here. We will eventually in this class there will be some kind of handling of the button press. So in the view we'll have the kind of the typical equip button, unequip button, select, whatever things. So whenever you press that button, this is kind of a fake call. This is what we will expect in this kind of view. Something like the equip button pressed, it will give you a game object, what game object was equipped. So we will get the reference to the item UI, and then we call the equip item, which the only thing that we'll do is to invoke the delegate, so the other class that is listening to this thing will do something. We don't care who's listening to this thing or what that thing will do. Usually this thing means that the player controller, or well, the other class above that, will hear this kind of delegate and will decide what to do or what not to do. But for this view controller itself, that's all the responsibility that we have. We have equipped an item, we notify the system or our listeners, and that's all that we have to do here. We are not messing around with the player here or with other thing here. Send the callback to whatever invoked this thing and forget about it. It's all our responsibility here in this kind of thing. And well, whatever we init the view, or let's say we're about to open the view, we have to set the inventory. Like I said in the previous tutorial, we're about to inject an inventory in this view, and we will fill up our pool with real data. First thing, obviously, hide all the items in the pool, assuming that we had previously opened the window or whatever thing for our inventory. So we hide all the items, we reset all the items, and now we really do the classic for to fill the inventories. So we have an inventory that has been given, we have a reference to the inventory, so we get the item, and as long as we obviously don't exceed our pool range, We get the item, we fill it with all the labels on the things, you know, whatever quality it was, whatever image, whatever price, you know, all that kind of things is the, you know, kind of regular thing. There's nothing kind of special here at all. Just set the quality, set the name, set the ID, you know, those kinds of things. And then I just reposition the grid in order to lay out everything. As you can see, the view controller itself is also kind of another simplistic class, just like the inventory was, because the responsibilities of the view controller are just these things. Yeah, of course, there's the select item and the select item that just left empty in order for you to fill up the void. You imagine that what you will doing. This select item will probably be something like that. So someone will give us what kind of game object was selected, and we will select or whatever thing that we want to do with that. The interesting, well, interesting, not at all honestly, the item UI. The item UI will be pretty much like this thing, because in my case, like I said, I'm using a GUI, so I just have the UI labels and the sprite, and you will change this thing for the standard Unity UI. But like as you can see, that's really simplistic, all this thing. As this is the item UI, we have to add here things like I have left out, like for example sound or particles if the object itself has anything when you select that. Remember that this is the item UI, so probably you have here another sprite for the selecting, kind of the highlight selection around the item, you know, something like that. Another image for the equipping thing, you know, probably when you equip the item you want something to notify your player that this item was equipped, so probably is another sprite there. So in my case I have just left the thing empty because this is just a tutorial and I just want to give you ideas, nothing else. We have to handle the selected boolean and the equip boolean in order, like I said, to draw those kind of a sprite of the selection sprite, the equip sprite. We hold a reference to this game object itself and the ID of this item. We have a public getter to get the ID for later on query this item from the outside, and our kind of init when we're about to fill out this object with the real information. So I mean what we did here, this init here. This is what we're about to fill up: the ID, the title, the description, price, whatever things that you want in your inventory. That's completely up to your inventory. What kind of information do you want to fill in? Also have this init empty for the pool. So the first time that we create the object, the pool in this case, all the objects are empty, so well, the reference is the same, but the ID will be 0 and all the other fields are just empty, and we hide the item itself. So that's pretty much it, because as you can see the other methods are just the same. If I active the object, I will go to the game object and active. If I unactive the object, I will turn off the item. Reset the item, I will just reset the ID. If the object was selected, I will set the flag, and probably here is where I will play a sound because that object was selected. I will put that image highlighting the selection of the item. Maybe I have even though particles to spawn, so you know, and the selection pretty much the same. I will maybe have a sound as well. I will remove the image, and the same for the equip. I will have another sound, particles, the image for the equip, and that's pretty much the item UI itself. As you can see, really our inventory is not really that kind of complicated itself. Now let's say to our last bit, the player controller. And the player controller was added here just to give you an idea of how these things kind of interact with each other. The player controller will only have the inventory but don't have any kind of view. This is kind of your regular player controller. We have all the stats here, all the other things that you have in your player controller, whatever game object for whatever things. But the thing that it's important for us is our inventory. We will have our inventory. Our player controller will only be handling during the game the inventory. So I mean the data itself. That's enough for us to understand what the player will have to do. If the player needs to add +2 in strength because it has a sword equip or whatever thing, will be done here in the player controller because we have our inventory. We are only exposing or giving our inventory away when we are opening that view. That's why we have this get inventory, so that way wherever someone calls the view controller will set the inventory, which will be the player inventory or whatever other character inventory. It's kind of not really important, you know. So that's kind of pretty much it, because, well, obviously the player controller will handle the inventory. Nonetheless, we will add items to the inventory, we'll delete items, we'll delete all the items, we will equip an item, we will unequip an item. That's something that will come, like I said, from outside class. The class that is handled the view controller on top is the one that will equip the item. We'll call the player and we'll look through up the list to check if the item matches, and we set that object to be equipped. And also here, as we are setting this equipped to be true, we also need to apply whatever stats we have to in this place. So to do apply stats for this equipped object. Pretty much that's all the tutorial about. I'm not going to discuss this kind of items creator class, because, like I said, it's just to generate the garbage objects. You can take a look at GitHub at the class itself. It's pretty self-explanatory. You are creating each of these categories. You create the random stats, you create the price, you create the item itself, blah blah blah. So I mean, nothing really interesting to discuss here. And the only thing that remains is the test inventory, which is the class that I was talking about, that will be handling the inventory view controller, the player controller, or whatever other thing. This is the class that kind of manages things together. So on a start, we have set the callbacks to know that the item was equipped, and this is the class that we call the player controller to say, hey, there was an equipped item or unequipped item. So wherever we equip an item or unequip an item, we will receive the call and we will act accordingly. And pretty much that's it. We're about doing this test, filling the items on the screen. We'll look through all the list. We create some random items like I discussed earlier, and pretty much nothing special. And finally, we inject to our view the inventory of this player controller that we have just filled up in this kind of testing thing. In a real world game, the player controller will have an inventory that has been read from probably JSON file or something else, and this is the only part that I'm not covering here, how to read a JSON file, because that's pretty simplistic at this point of time. But if you are interested or you need it, just let me know and I will create another tutorial about how to create those items in a JSON file and add it to our player or view or whatever other thing. So this is pretty much our inventory separation thing. As you can see, it's kind of different from what you are used to seeing in other tutorials. So that's pretty much it. If you have any comments, please leave a comment below and I'll see you in the next tutorial. See ya!